Claire Bennett felt her heart drop the moment she saw him, standing by the entrance of the ballroom. Daniel Ford. She had not seen him in 8 months, not since the night she packed 2 bags and left his apartment while he was still shouting through the bathroom door. She had promised herself she would never be in the same room as him again. Yet here he was, dressed in a sharp black suit, scanning the crowd of the Hearthstone charity gala as if he already knew she would be there. Claire pressed herself against the marble pillar near the champagne table, her pulse hammering in her ears. The gala was packed, hundreds of guests in gowns and tuxedos, waiters weaving between them with silver trays, a string quartet playing somewhere near the stage. She had come with her friend Lily Morgan to help set up the silent auction, nothing more. She was not supposed to run into anyone from her old life tonight. But Daniel was already moving through the crowd, and he was moving toward her. Claire's mind raced through her options. The nearest exit was on the far side of the room, past the dance floor, past dozens of people who would slow her down if she tried to run. The restrooms were closer, but Daniel had once waited outside a restroom for 40 minutes just to prove a point. Running was not really an option either. If she ran, he would only be more convinced that she still cared what he thought. She could feel her hands trembling as she gripped the small clutch bag against her chest. 8 months of therapy, 8 months of learning to sleep without checking her phone every 10 minutes, 8 months of rebuilding herself from nothing, and all of it seemed to be unraveling in a matter of seconds. Claire, Daniel said her name the way he always had, smooth and warm on the surface, but with something colder underneath it, something that made her stomach twist. I didn't expect to see you here. I have to go, she said quickly, stepping back. He stepped forward, closing the distance she had just created. Come on, it's a party. Can't we just talk for a minute? You look good, really good. Daniel, please. 1 minute, Claire. That's all I'm asking. She glanced around the room, searching for Lily, but her friend had disappeared somewhere near the auction tables, probably arranging the last few donated items. Claire was alone in a room full of strangers, and the one person she recognized was the one person she needed to avoid. Daniel reached out and closed his fingers gently around her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make it clear he had no intention of letting her simply walk away. You always did this, he said, his voice low now, meant only for her. You always ran the second things got difficult. Do you know how that made me look when you just disappeared? Let go of me. I just want to talk. Claire's eyes darted across the room, searching for anything, any way out of this moment before it turned into something worse. She had learned over the past 8 months that the first sign of trouble with Daniel was never loud. It was quiet, controlled, reasonable sounding right up until it was not. She could feel the familiar tightness building in her chest, the same fear that used to keep her up at night. That was when she saw him. A man was standing only a few feet away, near the edge of the small crowd gathered around the auction table, holding a glass of sparkling water rather than champagne. He was tall, with dark hair beginning to gray at the temples, dressed in a plain but well-tailored gray suit with no tie, no name tag, nothing that marked him as anyone important. He looked, if anything, a little out of place, the way a man looks when he has been dragged to an event he did not particularly want to attend. He was not looking at his phone. He was not talking to anyone. He was simply standing there, quietly observing the room, as though he found people more interesting to watch than to speak with. Claire did not know him. She had never seen him before in her life. But in that instant, with Daniel's fingers still wrapped around her wrist and panic rising in her throat, he was the only thing close enough to reach. She pulled her arm free with a sharp twist, stepped quickly toward the stranger, and slipped her arm through his before he had any idea what was happening. There you are, she said, forcing brightness into her voice loud enough for Daniel to hear. I was wondering where you'd gone. The man turned his head, and for half a second his expression was one of pure surprise. His eyebrows lifted slightly, his glass of sparkling water paused halfway to his lips. He looked down at the woman who had suddenly attached herself to his arm as though she were trying to solve a puzzle in real time. Claire's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. She kept her eyes fixed on him, silently begging him not to ask questions, not yet, not here. Daniel had followed her, of course. He stopped a few steps away, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Claire standing close beside a stranger, her arm looped through his as though they had known each other for years. "Claire," Daniel said again, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Who is this?" For one long, terrible second, nobody said anything. Claire's mind went completely blank. She had acted on pure instinct, grabbing the nearest person who looked calm and unbothered, without any plan for what would happen next. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was the stranger who spoke first. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly, setting his glass down on a nearby table and placing his free hand gently over Claire's, the one still resting on his arm. His voice was calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once in his life felt the need to raise it to be heard. "Have we met?" Daniel blinked. "I'm asking who you are." "Nathan," the man said simply, offering nothing more, no last name, no title, nothing that would give Daniel any information to hold on to. "And you are?" "Daniel, Claire's boyfriend." "Ex-boyfriend," Claire cut in quickly, her voice sharper than she intended. Nathan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of understanding passing behind them, as though several pieces of a puzzle had just clicked quietly into place. He glanced at Claire's wrist, still faintly red from where Daniel's fingers had gripped it, and then back at Daniel's face. "I see," Nathan said, his tone still perfectly polite, perfectly even. "Well, Daniel, Claire and I were actually about to step outside for some air. It was nice meeting you." He did not wait for a response. With gentle but unmistakable pressure, he guided Claire away from the table, away from Daniel, moving them both toward the terrace doors at the side of the ballroom. Claire's legs felt unsteady beneath her, but she kept pace with him, too stunned by what she had just done, and by how smoothly this stranger had simply gone along with it, to do anything but follow. Behind them, she heard Daniel say her name one more time, but this time there was no answer, and after a moment, she did not hear his footsteps following. The terrace was cooler than the ballroom, the night air a welcome relief against Claire's flushed skin. String lights hung along the railing, and below them the city stretched out in a wash of gold and white lights. A few other guests stood scattered along the terrace, but none close enough to overhear. Nathan let go of her arm once they were a safe distance from the doors and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I am so sorry," Claire said immediately, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I don't know what came over me. I panicked and you were standing there and I didn't think I should not have done that without asking. I am so sorry." To her surprise, the corner of Nathan's mouth twitched upward, not quite a smile but close to one. "It's all right," he said. "Are you okay?" The simple question caught her off guard more than anything Daniel had said all night. Nobody had asked her that in a long time, not really, not in a way that expected a real answer. Claire felt her eyes sting unexpectedly, and she blinked hard, refusing to let herself cry in the middle of a stranger's kindness. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. We used to date and it ended badly, and he doesn't really understand the word no." Nathan nodded slowly, no judgment in his face, only a quiet, careful attention that made Claire feel, for the first time in months, like someone was actually listening. "You handled it well," he said. "Under the circumstances. I grabbed a total stranger and pretended he was my boyfriend." "You made a fast decision that got you out of a difficult situation," Nathan corrected gently. "I'd call that resourceful, not desperate." Claire let out a shaky laugh, some of the tension finally beginning to drain from her shoulders. She studied him properly for the first time, taking in the quiet confidence in the way he stood, the calm patience in his voice, the way he had not once demanded an explanation or made her feel foolish for what she had done. "I really am sorry," she said again. "I don't even know your last name." "It's fine," Nathan said, waving a hand lightly, as though the matter were entirely unimportant. "You looked like you needed help." I was happy to give it. Well, thank you, truly. You're welcome, Claire. She blinked. I didn't tell you my name. Your friend did, Nathan said, nodding toward the terrace doors, where Lily Morgan stood watching them with wide, curious eyes, clearly having witnessed at least part of what had just happened. A few minutes ago, before all of this. Claire turned, catching Lily's expression, half amusement, half concern, and felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment all over again. She turned back to Nathan, opening her mouth to apologize once more, but he held up a hand, cutting her off with a small, easy smile. Don't apologize again, he said. Go find your friend, make sure you're all right, and Claire, if he bothers you again tonight, come find me. I'll be around. Before she could respond, he gave her a small nod, turned and walked back toward the ballroom, disappearing into the crowd of guests as easily and quietly as he had appeared. Claire stood on the terrace for a long moment, the cool night air settling around her heart still racing, though for entirely different reasons now. She had no idea who Nathan was. She did not know his last name, his job, or why he had been standing alone with a glass of sparkling water at one of the most exclusive charity events of the year. All she knew was that a stranger had, without hesitation, stepped into the middle of her worst moment and made it just a little easier to bear. She would think about that kindness for a long time. She had no way of knowing, standing there under the string lights with the city glittering below her, just how much that single decision, grabbing the arm of a quiet man in a gray suit, was about to change the entire course of her life. Lily Morgan pulled Claire into the nearest quiet corner the moment she stepped back inside, her eyes wide with a mixture of worry and barely contained curiosity. Are you okay? Lily asked, gripping Claire's shoulders. I saw Daniel walking away looking like someone had slapped him. What happened? Who was that man? Claire let out a long breath, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Daniel was nowhere in sight. I panicked, she admitted. He cornered me by the champagne table, wouldn't let go of my wrist, and I grabbed the closest person and pretended he was my boyfriend. Lily's mouth fell open. You did what? I know it sounds insane. It is insane. Claire, you can't just grab a stranger at a gala and use him as a human shield. I didn't exactly have a better plan in the moment, Claire said, a small, disbelieving laugh escaping her. And he went along with it. He didn't even ask why. He just introduced himself as Nathan and told Daniel we were stepping outside for air. Lily's eyebrows rose even higher. Nathan who? I don't know. He didn't say a last name, and honestly, I was too busy having a small breakdown to ask. Lily glanced across the ballroom, scanning the crowd until her eyes landed on a familiar gray suit near the far side of the room, where Nathan stood speaking quietly with an older man in a navy blazer. Well, he's still here, she said, and he keeps looking over at you when he thinks you're not watching. Claire felt her cheeks warm, and she quickly looked away, pretending sudden interest in the silent auction table beside them, its rows of donated items glinting under the soft gallery lighting. He was just being polite, she said. He probably wants to make sure I'm not going to grab him again. Lily said, clearly unconvinced. Claire, the man just helped you escape your ex in front of half the city's most important people, and he did it without blinking. That's not politeness. That's chemistry. It's not chemistry, it's a stranger doing a kind thing. Sure, Lily said, drawing the word out slowly, a knowing smile spreading across her face. Whatever helps you sleep tonight. Claire rolled her eyes, but she could not fully suppress the small flutter in her chest at the memory of Nathan's calm voice, the easy way he had folded her panic into something manageable within seconds. She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on helping Lily finish arranging the final items for the silent auction, a task that at least gave her hands something useful to do. The rest of the evening passed without incident. Daniel did not approach her again, though she caught sight of him once near the bar, deep in conversation with someone Claire did not recognize, his earlier confidence apparently dampened. She avoided his side of the room entirely, sticking close to Lily and the auction tables until the event began winding down near midnight. She did not see Nathan again before she left. By the time she and Lily gathered their coats and made their way to the coat check, he had vanished from the ballroom entirely, as quietly as he had first appeared beside the champagne table. Claire told herself it did not matter. He had done a kind thing for a stranger, and that was the end of it. People like that did not typically cross paths twice. She was wrong. 3 days later, Claire arrived at Sterling and Rowe, the small downtown design firm where she worked as a junior interior designer, expecting an ordinary Wednesday of sketching floor plans and fielding emails from clients who could never quite decide on a paint color. Instead, she found her supervisor, a sharp, energetic woman named Priya Malhotra, waiting for her by the reception desk with an expression Claire had never seen on her before, something between excitement and disbelief. "Claire," Priya said the moment she walked through the door, "you are not going to believe what just happened." "What's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is very, very right." Priya practically pulled Claire into the small conference room at the back of the office, where a folder sat open on the polished table, a set of building blueprints spread out beside it. "We just got a call this morning. A private client wants to hire the firm for a full renovation project, a big one, and he asked for you specifically." Claire blinked. "Me? I've only been here a year. Why would anyone ask for me specifically?" "That's what I asked," Priya said, still sounding stunned. "The assistant who called didn't give many details, just said the client saw some of your recent work and wanted you leading the design on this one. Claire, this client owns half the buildings between here and the river. Do you understand what kind of opportunity this is?" Claire sat down slowly in one of the conference room chairs, her mind spinning. She had worked on a handful of small residential projects since joining the firm, nothing large enough to attract this kind of attention. "Who is the client?" she asked. "What's his name?" Priya glanced down at the folder, flipping through a few pages before answering. "The paperwork just lists the company, Cole Holdings. The point of contact is someone named Oliver Grant, an assistant of some kind. He's supposed to meet with you tomorrow morning to walk through the project details." The name Cole Holdings meant nothing to Claire, though something about the strange, sudden nature of the request nagged quietly at the back of her mind. She thought briefly of Nathan, of the way he had simply appeared at the gala, calm and composed among a crowd of the city's wealthiest residents, and dismissed the thought just as quickly. It was a coincidence, nothing more. The city was full of successful men in well-tailored suits. The following morning, Claire arrived at the address she had been given, a converted warehouse building near the waterfront that Cole Holdings was apparently planning to transform into a mixed-use community space, part gallery, part public library, part gathering hall for local artists and residents. It was, she quickly realized as she studied the site plans Oliver Grant handed her, an ambitious and deeply thoughtful project, the kind of work she had dreamed about doing since architecture school, work that mattered to a community rather than simply decorating another luxury penthouse. Oliver Grant turned out to be a polite, efficient man in his 30s, dressed in a neat charcoal suit, carrying a tablet loaded with notes and reference images. He walked Claire through the building for nearly 2 hours, answering her questions about budget, timeline, and the client's vision with practiced ease, though Claire noticed he was careful never to mention the client's name directly, referring to him only as "my employer" or occasionally, simply, "he." "Will I be meeting the client at some point?" Claire finally asked, as they stood in the building's central atrium, sunlight pouring through a row of tall arched windows. Oliver glanced up from his tablet, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "He likes to stay fairly hands-off during the early planning stages," he said, "but I imagine you'll cross paths eventually. He tends to take a personal interest in projects like this one." Claire nodded, deciding not to push the matter further. Whoever this mysterious client was, the project itself was more than enough to hold her attention. She spent the rest of the week buried in sketches and material samples, pouring herself into the design with an enthusiasm she had not felt in months, grateful for something meaningful to occupy the space in her mind that used to be filled with anxious thoughts about Daniel. It was nearly 2 weeks later, on a gray, drizzling afternoon, when Claire returned to the warehouse site to review measurements for the eastern wing, that she saw him again. Nathan stood near the tall arched windows, hands tucked into the pockets of a simple dark coat, studying the unfinished space with the same quiet, observant expression he had worn at the gala. He did not notice her at first, giving her a brief moment to study him, to confirm that yes, this was truly the same man who had rescued her from Daniel weeks earlier, standing in the middle of the very building she had been hired to help design. "Nathan," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the empty atrium. He turned, and for a moment something flickered across his face, surprise, quickly followed by something warmer, something that looked almost like relief. "Claire," he said. "I didn't expect to see you here so soon." "I could say the same thing," she said, walking toward him, her earlier nervousness replaced by simple curiosity. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question." "I'm the interior designer on this project," Claire said. "Sterling and Rowe, we're handling the full renovation." Something in Nathan's expression shifted again, a small, private amusement that Claire could not quite decipher. "Is that right?" he said, more statement than question. "Small world." "Very small," Claire agreed, though a faint, uneasy feeling began stirring in the back of her mind. The same nagging sense of coincidence that had followed her since Priya first mentioned Cole Holdings. "Do you work for the company that owns this building?" Nathan considered the question for a long moment, and Claire had the strange sense that he was carefully choosing his next words. "You could say that," he said eventually. "I have some involvement with the project." "What kind of involvement?" "The kind that means I get to walk through half-finished buildings and offer opinions nobody asked for," he said, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Mostly I just like watching things get built. There's something honest about it. Nothing hidden, nothing pretending to be something it isn't. Just materials and effort and time." Claire studied him, unable to shake the feeling that there was more beneath his easy, deflecting answer than he was letting on, though she could not begin to guess what that might be. Still, there was something disarming about the way he spoke, thoughtful and unhurried, entirely unlike the polished, performative charm she had grown used to from men like Daniel. "Well," she said finally, deciding not to press the matter, "since you're here, would you like to see the plans for the East Wing? I could use a second opinion, even one from someone who just likes watching things get built." Nathan's smile widened, genuine this time, reaching all the way to his eyes. "I would like that very much," he said. They spent the next hour walking through the unfinished space together, Claire unrolling blueprints across a makeshift table of plywood and sawhorses, explaining her vision for the gallery walls, the reading nooks tucked beneath the arched windows, the open community hall where she hoped local artists could host workshops and events. Nathan listened closely, asking thoughtful questions, offering small suggestions that Claire found herself genuinely considering rather than simply humoring. There was an ease between them that surprised her, a comfort she had not expected to feel so soon after everything with Daniel. Nathan did not fill silences with empty conversation the way most people did. He seemed content to simply listen, to observe, to let Claire's ideas fill the space between them, only speaking when he had something worth saying. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said, as they stood near the windows, watching the rain streak gently down the old glass. "Of course. That night at the gala, why did you go along with it? I grabbed a total stranger's arm and lied to your face in front of another stranger, and you didn't even hesitate." Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "You looked afraid," he said finally. "I've seen a lot of people pretend to be fine when they're not. I recognized it in you almost immediately. It didn't seem like a difficult decision, helping someone who genuinely needed it." Claire felt something warm settle in her chest, a feeling she was not entirely ready to name. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for that, really." "You already thanked me," Nathan said, the corner of his mouth lifting again. "But you're welcome again." Outside, the rain continued its steady drumming against the old warehouse windows, and inside, surrounded by half-finished blueprints and the quiet, easy company of a man she barely knew and yet somehow already trusted. Claire allowed herself, for the first time in a long while, to simply feel hopeful about what might come next. She still did not know his last name. She still had no idea that the man standing beside her, discussing reading nooks and gallery walls with such quiet enthusiasm, was the sole owner of Cole Holdings, the man whose personal fortune was so vast that financial magazines had spent the better part of a decade arguing over whether he or a handful of technology founders truly held the title of the wealthiest man in America. All Claire knew, standing in that rain-streaked atrium, was that for the first time in a long while she felt safe. Over the following weeks, Nathan became a quiet, steady presence in Claire's days, though never in a way that felt overwhelming or forced. He showed up at the warehouse site every few days, sometimes staying only a few minutes to look over new sketches, other times lingering for hours as Claire worked through material samples and lighting plans. He never explained exactly what his role with Cole Holdings was, and Claire, still cautious after everything with Daniel, found herself reluctant to push too hard for answers, content instead to simply enjoy the calm, easy rhythm that had grown between them. Lily, of course, had opinions about the situation, and she was not shy about sharing them. "You've been working with this man for almost a month," Lily said one evening, sprawled across Claire's couch with a glass of wine in hand, while Claire sorted through fabric swatches on the coffee table. "A month, Claire. And you still don't know his last name." "It hasn't come up," Claire said, though even she could hear how unconvincing that sounded. "It hasn't come up," Lily repeated flatly. "You spend 3 afternoons a week with the man, and his last name just hasn't come up. We talk about the project mostly. Design stuff. He's really thoughtful about it, actually, more than I expected from someone who's just, I don't know, invested in the building somehow." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Invested how? What does he actually do?" Claire hesitated, realizing as she opened her mouth to answer that she genuinely did not have a clear response. Nathan spoke often and easily about art, about architecture, about the small, human details of the community the building would eventually serve. He asked thoughtful questions about her sketches, remembered small comments she had made in passing weeks earlier, brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it without ever being told. But whenever the conversation shifted toward his own life, his work, his family, he had a practiced way of steering it gently elsewhere, so smoothly that Claire had not even noticed the pattern until now, turning the question back over in her mind. "I don't actually know," she admitted slowly. "He's involved with Cole Holdings somehow. Beyond that, I'm not really sure." "Doesn't that seem strange to you?" "A little," Claire admitted. "But he's never made me feel unsafe or uncertain the way Daniel used to. If anything, he's the opposite, careful, patient. He listens more than he talks." Lily softened slightly at that, setting her wine glass down and studying her friend with a more serious expression. "I'm glad he makes you feel that way," she said. "I just want you to be careful. After everything with Daniel, I don't want you getting swept up in something without understanding what it actually is." "I know," Claire said quietly. "I'm being careful." But even as she said the words, she was not entirely certain they were true. The following Tuesday, Claire arrived at the warehouse earlier than usual, hoping to get a head start on measurements for the new reading nook before the rest of the construction crew showed up. As she approached the building's side entrance, she noticed a sleek black car parked at the curb, its engine idling quietly, a driver standing beside it dressed in a plain dark suit, scrolling through something on his phone. She thought little of it at first. City streets were full of cars and drivers waiting for important clients. But as she reached the door, she overheard a fragment of conversation drifting from just inside the entrance. "Mr. Cole should be finished within the hour," a voice was saying, one Claire recognized as belonging to Oliver Grant. "I'll let the driver know to expect him around 10. Claire paused just outside the door, a small, curious frown tugging at her brow. Mr. Cole. She had heard the name Cole Holdings dozens of times over the past month, always in reference to the company funding the renovation, never once connected to an actual person standing inside the building. She wondered, briefly, if perhaps the company's owner had come by to check on the project's progress, and felt an odd flicker of nervousness at the thought of finally meeting the person whose vision she had been working so hard to bring to life. She stepped inside just as Oliver ended his call, glancing up and offering her a polite, easy smile that gave nothing away. "Morning, Claire," he said. "You're here early." "I wanted to get a start on the measurements before the crew arrives," she said, glancing toward the atrium, half expecting to see an unfamiliar executive in an expensive suit reviewing blueprints. Instead, she found only Nathan, standing near the arched windows in his usual plain, unassuming coat, sketching something quickly in a small notebook. "Morning," he said, glancing up with a warm smile as she approached. "You're up early." "So are you," she said, setting her bag down on the plywood table. "Actually, I overheard Oliver on the phone. He mentioned someone named Mr. Cole was here this morning. Is that the owner? I was hoping I might finally get to meet him." For the briefest moment, something flickered across Nathan's face, so quickly that Claire almost missed it entirely, gone before she could fully identify what it was. He closed his notebook and offered her an easy, unreadable smile. "He's a fairly private person," Nathan said. "Doesn't much care for formal introductions." "That's a little mysterious," Claire said, only half joking. "Some people prefer to stay out of the spotlight," Nathan said simply. "It doesn't mean much beyond that." Claire studied him for a moment, that same faint, nagging suspicion tugging at the back of her mind again, though she could not quite piece together what exactly was bothering her. There was something in the careful, practiced way Nathan deflected the question, something that reminded her uncomfortably of the way Oliver had avoided naming the client during their very first meeting weeks earlier. She decided, for now, to let the matter drop, unwilling to spoil the easy comfort of the morning with unanswered questions. They spent the next several hours reviewing measurements together, Nathan holding one end of the tape measure while Claire called out numbers, the two of them falling into an easy, familiar rhythm that had become one of Claire's favorite parts of the week. It was nearly noon when Oliver returned, tablet in hand, glancing between the two of them with a faint, knowing expression that Claire could not quite decipher. "Sir," Oliver said, addressing Nathan with a small, respectful nod, "the board wants to move the quarterly meeting up to Thursday. They're asking if you'll be available." Claire blinked, glancing between the two men, that same uneasy feeling rising sharply in her chest. "The board," she repeated slowly. "What board?" Oliver's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of realization crossing his face, as though he had just made a small but significant mistake. He glanced quickly toward Nathan, an unspoken question passing between them. "It's fine," Nathan said quietly, though his tone had grown noticeably more careful. "I'll deal with it, Oliver." "Thank you." Oliver nodded and excused himself quickly, disappearing back toward the front of the building, leaving Claire and Nathan alone in the atrium, an unfamiliar tension settling over the space between them. "What board was he talking about?" Claire asked, her voice quieter now, more cautious. Nathan was silent for a long moment, and Claire watched, with growing unease, as he seemed to weigh several possible answers before finally settling on one. "There are things about my work that I haven't fully explained to you," he said carefully. "Not because I've been trying to deceive you, Claire. I want you to understand that. But because, in my experience, once people learn certain things about who I am, everything changes. The way they talk to me, the way they treat me, even the questions they ask. I wanted, just for a little while, to be someone you got to know without any of that standing between us." Claire felt her stomach tighten, an old, familiar wariness creeping back into her chest, though this felt different from anything she had experienced with Daniel, quieter, sadder somehow, rather than threatening. "What are you talking about, Nathan? What haven't you told me?" He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, his phone buzzed sharply in his coat pocket. He glanced down at the screen, his expression tightening with something that looked almost like frustration, and Claire watched as he hesitated, clearly torn between the conversation in front of him and whatever was waiting on the other end of that call. I have to take this, he said quietly. It's important, but Claire, I promise you I will explain everything, just not like this, not rushed in the middle of a job site. Can we talk properly? Tonight, maybe. Dinner. Claire studied him for a long moment, torn between the urge to demand answers immediately and the quiet, steady trust that had grown between them over the past month. A trust that told her, despite everything, that whatever he was hiding was not born of cruelty or manipulation, but of something more complicated, something he seemed genuinely uncertain how to navigate. All right, she said finally, tonight, but Nathan, I need honesty, all of it. You'll have it, he said, relief clear in his voice. I promise. He excused himself quickly, stepping outside to take his call, leaving Claire standing alone in the atrium, blueprints spread across the plywood table, sunlight streaming through the tall arched windows onto the unfinished floor. She stood there for a long moment, arms wrapped around herself, turning the strange morning over in her mind again and again, searching for some explanation that made sense of Oliver's careful deflections. The sleek black car outside, the mysterious board meeting, the way Nathan seemed to carry himself with a quiet, practiced authority that Claire had noticed before but never fully questioned. She thought about texting Lily, asking her opinion, but something stopped her, a strange, cautious instinct telling her to wait, to hear whatever Nathan had to say before jumping to conclusions. She had spent the past month coming to know him as thoughtful, careful, unfailingly kind, entirely unlike anyone she had encountered before. Surely, whatever secret he was carrying could not undo all of that. Still, as she gathered her things and prepared to leave the site for the afternoon, she could not shake the small, persistent knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. That evening, Nathan picked her up himself, driving a modest sedan rather than the sleek black car she had seen outside the warehouse that morning, a small detail that eased some of her nerves as she climbed into the passenger seat. He took her to a quiet, unassuming restaurant tucked away on a side street, the kind of place with only a handful of tables and no sign advertising its name, the sort of restaurant Claire imagined only locals ever discovered. They were seated in a private corner booth, and for the first several minutes, conversation remained light, almost deliberately so, both of them circling the larger conversation waiting beneath the surface. It was only after their food arrived that Nathan finally set down his fork, folded his hands together on the table, and met Claire's eyes with a steady, serious expression. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything, because it's going to sound strange, and I need you to understand why I've kept it from you. Claire's heart began to race, though she forced herself to remain calm, nodding slowly. Okay, she said. I'm listening. Nathan took a slow breath, glancing briefly toward the window before returning his gaze to hers. The company that hired your firm, Cole Holdings, it isn't just a company I have some involvement with, he said carefully. It's mine. I founded it. I run it. Every decision, every project, every dollar, all of it ultimately comes back to me. Claire blinked, processing his words slowly, a strange, disorienting feeling settling over her. Okay, she said slowly. So you're what, an executive, a director? I'm the owner, Nathan said quietly. The only owner. Claire, my full name is Nathan Cole. The name settled over the table like a weight, and Claire felt something cold and unfamiliar tighten in her chest as pieces of the past month began rearranging themselves rapidly in her mind. The private driver, the board meetings, Oliver's careful deflections, the quiet, practiced authority in the way Nathan carried himself, all of it clicking suddenly, sharply into place. Nathan Cole, she repeated slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. As in Cole Global, as in the Nathan Cole. He held her gaze steadily, though she could see something uncertain, almost nervous, flickering behind his calm expression, an unfamiliar vulnerability she had not seen from him before. Yes, he said simply. That Nathan Cole. Claire sat back slowly in her seat, her mind spinning as she tried to reconcile the quiet, thoughtful man who had spent the past month holding tape measures and discussing reading nooks with the name she had seen splashed across business magazine headlines for years. A name synonymous with staggering, almost unimaginable wealth. A name that, according to more than one financial publication she could recall, belonged to the single richest man in the entire country. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked finally, her voice tight. "This whole time, Nathan, you let me believe you were just, I don't know, some ordinary employee. Someone with some vague involvement in the project. Because the moment people learn who I am, everything changes," Nathan said quietly, leaning forward slightly. "I've watched it happen more times than I can count. People stop seeing me. They start seeing the money, the company, the headlines. I wanted just once for someone to know me first, to trust the version of me that exists before any of that comes into the picture." Claire studied him for a long moment, torn between understanding and a rising, uncomfortable sense of betrayal, however unintentional it might have been. She thought of every quiet afternoon at the warehouse, every easy conversation, every small kindness she had come to trust over the past month, and wondered, with a small, sinking feeling, how much of it had been shaped by a secret she had never known to look for. "I need some time," she said finally, setting her napkin down on the table. "This is a lot, Nathan. I need to think." He nodded slowly, disappointment clear in his eyes, though he did not argue, did not push, did not try to convince her to feel differently than she did. "I understand," he said quietly. "Take whatever time you need. But Claire, please know none of what happened between us these past few weeks was a lie. That part was real. All of it." Claire left the restaurant that night with far more questions than answers, her mind spinning with 100 small memories now cast in an entirely new light, uncertain, for the first time since the night of the gala, whether the quiet, steady comfort she had come to feel around Nathan Cole had ever truly been what it seemed. Claire did not sleep much that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, her phone resting on the nightstand beside her, the screen dark and silent, though her mind would not stop racing through the events of the evening. Nathan Cole. The name felt strange sitting inside her thoughts, foreign and unfamiliar despite how many times she had likely seen it printed somewhere over the years, tucked into headlines about record-breaking earnings, technology breakthroughs, and philanthropic donations large enough to fund entire hospitals. She had never paid much attention to that world, the world of billionaires and boardrooms, and now she found herself wondering how she had spent an entire month standing beside one of its most powerful figures without ever suspecting a thing. She thought about texting Lily, but it was well past midnight, and she was not entirely sure how to explain the situation in a way that would not sound completely unbelievable. Instead, she opened her laptop and typed his name into a search engine, immediately met with a flood of results: articles, interviews, photographs of Nathan in tailored suits shaking hands with world leaders, headlines speculating about his net worth, his business empire, his famously private personal life. She scrolled through page after page, her stomach tightening with each new article. Nathan Cole, founder and sole owner of Cole Global, a sprawling company with holdings in technology, renewable energy, real estate, and media, was regularly listed among the wealthiest individuals in the country, his personal fortune estimated in numbers so large Claire found them difficult to fully comprehend. There were photographs of grand estates, private planes, headlines about failed attempts by journalists to secure interviews. A man who had built an empire while somehow remaining almost entirely absent from public life, beyond the occasional press release. None of it matched the man she had come to know over the past month, the man who brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it, who listened patiently as she explained her vision for reading nooks and gallery walls, who had stepped without hesitation into the middle of her worst moment at the gala and asked for nothing in return. She closed her laptop eventually, unable to reconcile the two versions of him swirling in her mind, and finally drifted into an uneasy sleep sometime near dawn. The following morning, she told Lily everything over breakfast, watching her friend's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something bordering on shock as the pieces fell into place. "Nathan Cole," Lily repeated slowly, setting down her coffee cup with a small, unsteady clatter. Claire, that's insane. Do you understand how insane that is? You've been spending your afternoons with one of the richest men in the entire country, and he's been carrying blueprints and holding tape measures like some kind of regular guy. I know, Claire said quietly, pushing her eggs around her plate without much interest in eating them. I don't know what to do with it. What do you mean, what to do with it? Are you going to see him again? Claire hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me understands why he didn't tell me right away. He said people treat him differently once they know, and I believe that's probably true. But another part of me feels, I don't know, foolish. Like I missed something obvious that everyone else would have noticed. You're not foolish, Lily said firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her friend's hand. You liked him for who he was in front of you. That's not foolishness, Claire, that's exactly what he said he wanted. You just have to decide if you can trust that he'll be honest with you moving forward. Claire nodded slowly, though the uncertainty in her chest refused to fully settle. She spent the rest of the day distracted, moving through her work at Sterling and Rowe without much focus, her mind circling back again and again to the quiet, careful expression on Nathan's face as he had told her the truth, the vulnerability she had glimpsed beneath his usual calm. She did not hear from him that day, nor the next, and she found herself both relieved and disappointed by his silence, as though some part of her had expected him to push harder, to insist on convincing her, and another part of her respected him more for simply giving her the space she had asked for. It was on the third day, as Claire left the Sterling and Rowe offices for the evening, that she found Daniel waiting near her car, leaning casually against the hood as though he had every right to be there. Her stomach dropped instantly, old instincts flaring to life. Daniel, she said carefully, stopping several feet away, what are you doing here? I heard something interesting, Daniel said, pushing off the car and straightening his jacket, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face that Claire had learned long ago to distrust completely. About your new friend from the gala, Nathan Cole. That's quite the upgrade, Claire. Claire's jaw tightened. How do you know about that? People talk, Daniel said with a careless shrug. Especially when someone as private as Nathan Cole suddenly starts showing interest in a junior designer from a mid-tier firm. People notice things like that. They wonder what's really going on. There's nothing going on that concerns you, Claire said, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. Move away from my car. Daniel ignored her, tilting his head with an infuriating, knowing expression. You should be careful, Claire. Men like that, men with that kind of money, they don't fall for regular people. Not really. You're an interesting distraction to him right now, something new, something different from the usual crowd he deals with. But distractions fade. And when his fades, what exactly do you think happens to you? That's not your concern, Claire snapped, though a small, unwelcome seed of doubt planted itself somewhere in her chest despite her best efforts to ignore it. Get away from my car, Daniel. I'm not going to ask again. Something in her tone must have finally registered, because Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender, stepping back with an irritating smirk still plastered across his face. Just looking out for you, he said. Old habits, I suppose. You never looked out for me, Claire said quietly, fury and old hurt tangled together in her voice. Not once, not really. She got into her car without another word, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel as she pulled away, Daniel's smug expression fading in her rearview mirror. She drove several blocks before pulling over near a quiet park, sitting in silence for several long minutes as she tried to steady her breathing, tried to push aside the poisonous doubt his words had planted, however unwelcome and however undeserved. Distractions fade. She hated that his words had gotten under her skin at all, hated that some small, wounded part of her, shaped by years of Daniel's careful manipulation, still flinched at the suggestion that she might not be enough, that she might simply be a passing curiosity to a man whose life existed on a scale she could barely imagine. Her phone buzzed suddenly in the cup holder beside her, and she glanced down to see Nathan's name lighting up the screen. She hesitated for a long moment before answering. Hello. Claire, Nathan's voice came through, warm and careful, though there was a note of concern beneath it, as though he could somehow sense something was wrong. I know I said I'd give you space. I don't want to push. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Claire closed her eyes, resting her head briefly against the steering wheel. I ran into Daniel, she said quietly. He knows about you, about us, or whatever this is. He had some things to say about it. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and when Nathan spoke again, his voice had shifted, quieter, more serious. Are you all right? I'm fine, Claire said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. He said some things that got under my skin more than I wanted them to. What kind of things? Claire hesitated, unsure whether to voice the doubt Daniel had planted, unsure whether saying it aloud would give it more power than it deserved. He said I'm probably just a distraction to you, she said finally, quietly. Something new and different until it isn't anymore. Nathan was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet, steady conviction that eased some of the tightness in Claire's chest. Claire, I need you to understand something. I have met more people in my life than I can possibly count, executives, celebrities, politicians, people from every corner of wealth and influence you can imagine. None of them made me feel the way I felt standing beside you at that gala, watching you handle a difficult situation with more grace and strength than most people I know could manage. You are not a distraction to me. You never have been. Claire felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back quickly, unwilling to let herself cry over something so uncertain, so new. I want to believe that, she said quietly. I do. I've been burned before, Nathan, badly, and this is all so much bigger than anything I've ever navigated. I understand, Nathan said gently, and I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking for the chance to earn that trust properly, slowly, however long it takes. Take whatever time you need, Claire. I'll be here. She sat quietly for a long moment, the phone pressed to her ear, the quiet hum of the park around her slowly settling her frayed nerves. Okay, she said finally, a small, tentative decision forming in her chest. Okay, I think I'd like to see you again, properly this time. No hidden identities, no secrets. No secrets, Nathan agreed, warmth returning fully to his voice. I promise. They made plans to meet again that weekend, and as Claire finally pulled back onto the road, driving home through the fading evening light, she allowed herself, cautiously, to hope that whatever doubt Daniel had tried to plant in her chest might, given enough time and enough honesty, eventually prove entirely unfounded. She had no way of knowing that Daniel's interference that evening was only the beginning, nor that the quiet, private life Nathan had worked so carefully to protect was about to be tested in ways far more complicated than a jealous ex waiting beside her car. The weekend arrived quietly, without the fanfare Claire had half expected after everything that had happened over the previous days. Nathan picked her up in the same modest sedan as before, and they spent the afternoon walking through a public garden on the edge of the city, away from crowds, away from any chance of being recognized. He told her, as they walked slowly along a path lined with blooming flowers, about the early years of building his company, long nights spent in a cramped office with only 2 employees, the fear of failure that had followed him for years even after his first real success. Claire found herself listening closely, piecing together a fuller picture of the man beside her, someone who had built an empire not from arrogance or entitlement, but from a stubborn, careful determination that had never quite let up, even after wealth beyond imagination had settled into his life. He spoke about his parents, both gone now, about a childhood spent watching his father struggle to keep a small hardware store afloat, about promising himself, even as a boy, that he would build something that could never be taken away by forces beyond his control. That's part of why I liked working on the warehouse project so much, he admitted, as they paused beside a small fountain, sunlight scattering across the rippling water. It reminded me of that feeling, building something real, something that mattered beyond profit margins and quarterly earnings. I don't get to feel that very often anymore. You could, though, Claire said softly, if you wanted to. Nathan glanced at her, something warm and grateful passing across his face. Maybe, he said. With the right company. Claire felt her cheeks warm, and for a long moment they simply stood together beside the fountain, comfortable in a silence that no longer felt uncertain or strange, but steady, easy, like something worth holding onto. For several weeks after that, their relationship deepened quietly, carefully, away from public attention. Nathan continued visiting the warehouse site regularly, and their evenings together became a comfortable routine: quiet dinners, long walks, evenings spent simply talking until well past midnight. Claire found herself, slowly and cautiously, letting go of the doubts Daniel had planted, replacing them instead with a growing, steady trust in the man who had proven, again and again, that his interest in her had never wavered, regardless of how complicated his world truly was. It could not stay hidden forever. The trouble began on an otherwise ordinary Thursday morning, when Claire arrived at Sterling and Row to find Priya waiting at her desk, an unusually serious expression on her face, a tablet held tightly in her hands. "Claire," Priya said carefully, "I think you need to see this." She turned the tablet around, and Claire's stomach dropped as she saw the headline splashed across a popular gossip website, accompanied by a grainy photograph of herself and Nathan standing together outside the restaurant where he had first told her the truth about his identity. Taken, it seemed, from some distance away, likely by a passerby who had recognized him. The headline read in bold, sensational lettering, "America's most private billionaire spotted with mystery woman, sparking speculation." Claire's hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the brief article, which offered little actual information beyond wild speculation about her identity, her background, and the nature of her relationship with Nathan Cole. Several comments beneath the article had already begun questioning her motives, suggesting she was likely nothing more than someone hoping to secure a share of his fortune. "How did this happen?" Claire asked quietly, her voice tight. "I don't know," Priya said gently. "But Claire, you should probably prepare yourself. Once something like this starts, it tends to spread quickly." Priya was right. By the end of the day, several more articles had appeared, each one slightly more invasive than the last, digging into Claire's background, her employment at Sterling and Row, even old photographs from her social media accounts that she had not touched in years. Reporters began calling the firm directly, hoping to secure interviews or statements, and Claire found herself retreating into the back office by midday, overwhelmed by the sudden, unwelcome attention. Nathan called her that evening, his voice tight with concern and apology. "I am so sorry, Claire," he said. "This is exactly what I was trying to protect you from. I should have anticipated this happening sooner." "It's not your fault," Claire said, though her voice carried more exhaustion than conviction. I wasn't prepared for any of this. People writing articles about me, guessing about my life, deciding who I am without ever having met me." "I know," Nathan said quietly. "I've lived with it for years and it never gets easier. I wish I could shield you from it entirely, but the truth is, once people know about us, this kind of attention tends to follow. I understand completely if this feels like too much." Claire was quiet for a long moment, turning his words over carefully. "I don't want to run from this," she said finally. "I just need to understand how to live with it. Can you help me figure that out?" "Always," Nathan said, warmth returning to his voice. "We'll figure it out together." The following days brought new challenges neither of them had fully anticipated. Reporters staked out the warehouse site, forcing Claire and the construction crew to reroute their daily routines. Photographers occasionally trailed her car, capturing blurry photographs that quickly found their way onto various websites, accompanied by increasingly wild speculation about her past, her intentions, and her supposed pursuit of Nathan's fortune. Worse still, Claire soon discovered that Daniel had spoken with at least one reporter, offering details about their past relationship, carefully framed to paint Claire in the least flattering light possible. An article appeared within days, quoting an anonymous source close to Claire, describing her as manipulative and calculating, someone who had a history of, according to the article, using relationships for personal gain. Claire read the article late one night, alone in her apartment, her chest tight with anger and humiliation. She recognized Daniel's careful, manipulative phrasing immediately, the same subtle twisting of truth he had used against her throughout their entire relationship, though this time, it was being broadcast to thousands of strangers rather than confined to the privacy of their apartment. She called Nathan immediately, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Daniel talked to them," she said. "I know it was him. The details, the way it's written, it's exactly how he used to talk about me when things went wrong between us." Nathan's voice was calm but firm on the other end of the line. "I'll look into it," he said. "Claire, I promise you, we will handle this properly. You don't deserve any of this." Within 2 days, Nathan's legal team had issued a formal statement addressing the false claims directly, and though the initial articles remained online, the narrative began shifting slightly, other outlets picking up the correction, some even publishing more balanced pieces about the situation. Still, the experience left Claire shaken, the constant scrutiny wearing steadily on her sense of privacy and peace. It was during this stressful period that Claire first met Margaret Hale, the longtime chair of Cole Global's board of directors, a sharp, formidable woman in her 60s who had known Nathan since the earliest days of his company. Margaret requested a private meeting with Claire, arranged quietly through Oliver, and Claire arrived at the designated restaurant with a mixture of curiosity and nervous apprehension. Margaret did not waste time on pleasantries. "I'll be direct with you, Claire," she said, once they were both seated, her sharp eyes studying Claire carefully across the table. "I've watched Nathan build this company from nothing. I've watched him turn down countless opportunities for personal happiness because he refused to trust people who seemed far more interested in his wealth than in him as a person. I need to understand your intentions." Claire felt her spine straighten, an unexpected steadiness settling over her despite the intimidating nature of the conversation. "I understand your concern," she said carefully, "but I didn't even know who Nathan really was for the first month I knew him. I liked him before I had any idea about Cole Global, before I had any idea about his fortune, if that means anything to you." Margaret studied her for a long, silent moment, something unreadable passing behind her sharp gaze. "It means quite a lot, actually," she said finally, her tone softening slightly. "Though I imagine you understand why I needed to hear you say it myself, rather than simply take Nathan's word for it. He tends to see the best in people, sometimes to his own detriment." "I understand," Claire said. "For what it's worth, I have no interest in his money, his company, or any part of that world. I liked the man who held a tape measure and asked thoughtful questions about reading nooks. That's who I fell for." A small, genuine smile finally broke across Margaret's face, softening her sharp features considerably. "Good," she said. "Then perhaps this will work out after all." The meeting eased some of Claire's anxiety, though the broader pressures of public scrutiny did not fully disappear. Over the following weeks, she and Nathan settled slowly into a new, more complicated rhythm, learning together how to navigate a relationship now permanently exposed to public attention, learning to trust each other more deeply even as outside forces continued testing that trust from every direction. Daniel, however, was not finished. Nearly a month after the initial articles first appeared, Claire received an unexpected message from an old mutual friend, warning her that Daniel had been seen meeting with a well-known tabloid journalist known for aggressive, invasive reporting. Claire's stomach twisted with dread as she read the message, immediately calling Nathan to share the troubling news. "He's not going to stop," Claire said, pacing anxiously across her living room. "Nathan, I don't know what else he could possibly say, but I have a bad feeling about this." "We'll handle whatever comes," Nathan said firmly, though Claire could hear the tension in his own voice. "Claire, I need you to trust me on this. Whatever he tries next, we will face it together." 2 days later, the story broke, far more damaging than anything that had come before it. The tabloid published an article claiming, With fabricated evidence Claire could only assume Daniel had somehow manufactured, that she had orchestrated the entire meeting at the gala deliberately, having somehow learned of Nathan's identity beforehand, painting the entire relationship as a calculated scheme from its very first moment. The article spread rapidly, other outlets picking up the sensational claims, and within hours, Claire found herself facing a wave of public judgment far more intense than anything she had experienced before. Strangers online accusing her of manipulation, of deceit, of exploiting a moment of vulnerability at the gala for personal gain. Claire sat frozen at her kitchen table that evening, staring at her phone as message after message flooded in, some from concerned friends, others from strangers she had never met, hurling accusations she knew to be entirely false, yet felt powerless to fully disprove. She thought of Margaret's earlier words, of the careful trust she had worked so hard to build within Nathan's inner circle, and wondered, with a sinking, hollow feeling, whether this fabricated story might undo everything she had fought so hard to establish. When Nathan arrived at her apartment less than an hour later, his expression grim and determined, Claire finally allowed the tears she had been holding back all evening to fall freely. "I didn't plan any of this," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "I need you to know that. I really did just grab the nearest person because I was scared." "I know," Nathan said gently, pulling her into a careful, steady embrace. "I have never once doubted that, Claire, not for a single moment. We are going to fix this. I promise you." Claire nodded against his shoulder, though the exhausting weight of public scrutiny, fabricated accusations, and Daniel's relentless interference left her wondering, quietly and painfully, just how much more of this fragile, complicated new life she would be able to withstand before it finally broke her. Nathan spent the following morning locked in his office with his legal team, determined to trace the source of the fabricated claims and put an end to the damage once and for all. Claire, unable to focus on work, took a rare day off from Sterling and Rowe, spending most of the morning curled on her couch, phone switched to silent, trying to steady the anxious churn in her stomach. It was Lily who eventually convinced her to get up, arriving at her apartment shortly after noon with a bag of groceries and a firm, no-nonsense expression. "You are not going to sit here and let strangers on the internet decide who you are," Lily said, setting the groceries down on the counter with a decisive thud. "Get up. We're going to figure this out." "Figure out what exactly?" Claire asked, rubbing her tired eyes. "The story is already out there. People believe what they want to believe." "Not everyone," Lily said. "And besides, if Daniel fabricated evidence, there has to be proof of that somewhere. Lies like this don't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had to build it." Claire considered her friend's words carefully, a small, determined resolve beginning to settle over the exhaustion weighing on her chest. She thought back through the timeline of events, searching for anything that might explain how Daniel could have possibly constructed such a convincing, detailed story. It was then that she remembered something small, something she had nearly forgotten entirely amid the chaos of the past several weeks. On the night of the gala, shortly before Daniel had cornered her near the champagne table, she recalled seeing him deep in conversation with a woman near the entrance, someone Claire had not recognized at the time, dressed in the same formal attire as the rest of the event staff. "Lily," she said slowly, sitting up straighter, "I think I remember something. The night of the gala, before Daniel found me, I saw him talking to someone near the entrance. A woman. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but what if she worked for the event, and what if she told him something about Nathan being there?" Lily's eyes widened. "That could explain everything," she said. "If Daniel knew in advance that Nathan Cole was attending the gala, and if he somehow learned you might end up near him, the whole timeline of the fabricated story falls apart completely." Claire immediately called Nathan, relaying the memory as clearly as she could recall it. Within hours, his security team had identified the gala's full guest and staff list from that evening, cross-referencing names against Daniel's known associates. By early evening, they had confirmed Claire's suspicion. A woman named Renee Ashford, who had briefly dated Daniel earlier that year, had worked as part of the event's catering staff that night. and phone records, obtained through the legal team's careful investigation, confirmed that she and Daniel had exchanged several messages in the hours immediately before the gala began. Armed with this new information, Nathan's legal team moved quickly, reaching out directly to the journalist who had published the fabricated story, presenting clear evidence that directly contradicted the timeline Daniel had provided. Faced with the possibility of a serious legal challenge, the tabloid issued a hurried retraction within 2 days, publishing a follow-up article acknowledging that the original claims had been based on falsified information provided by an unreliable source. The retraction did not erase the damage entirely. Some corners of the internet clung stubbornly to the original, more sensational version of events, but it shifted the broader narrative significantly, other outlets picking up the corrected story, several even publishing more sympathetic pieces about the pressures Claire had faced throughout the entire ordeal. Daniel, for his part, disappeared from Claire's life almost entirely after the retraction was published. Whether out of embarrassment, fear of legal consequences, or simply having exhausted whatever twisted satisfaction he had hoped to gain from the entire scheme, he made no further attempts to contact her, and Claire found herself, for the first time in nearly a year, finally free of his lingering presence entirely. Still, the experience left its mark. Claire found herself more cautious in public, more guarded around unfamiliar faces, the constant awareness that any stranger might be watching, judging, ready to twist an innocent moment into something ugly. Nathan noticed the change in her almost immediately, and one quiet evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, he finally addressed it directly. "You've been different since everything happened," he said gently, studying her carefully in the soft evening light. "More careful. I understand why, but Claire, I don't want this life to change who you are." "I don't know how to not be careful anymore," Claire admitted quietly. "Everything used to feel simple. Now every conversation, every photograph, every stranger who recognizes me on the street, it all feels like it could turn into something else entirely." Nathan reached over, taking her hand gently in his. "I've lived this way for a long time," he said, "and I won't pretend it's easy. But Claire, I promise you, it does get easier to carry, especially when you're not carrying it alone." Claire studied him for a long moment, warmth slowly returning to her chest despite the lingering exhaustion of recent weeks. "I don't regret any of this," she said finally. "Even with everything that happened, I want you to know that. Even the tabloids, the strangers online deciding who you are." "Even that," Claire said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking across her face. "Because it also gave me this, gave me you. I think that's worth more than any of the difficulty it took to get here." Nathan's expression softened completely, something deeply relieved and grateful passing behind his eyes. He leaned forward slowly, and Claire met him halfway, the kiss quiet and steady, carrying within it all the careful trust they had built together across months of uncertainty, scrutiny, and quiet, determined honesty. In the weeks that followed, life gradually began settling into a calmer rhythm. The warehouse renovation project progressed steadily toward completion, and Claire found herself, more often than not, standing beside Nathan in the finished sections of the building, watching local artists begin setting up their work in the newly completed gallery spaces, watching children explore the reading nooks tucked beneath the tall arched windows exactly as she had envisioned them months earlier. Margaret Hale, true to her earlier promise, gradually warmed further to Claire, occasionally inviting her to smaller company gatherings, introducing her to other members of Cole Global's leadership with genuine warmth rather than cautious suspicion. Even Oliver Grant, who had remained carefully professional throughout the entire ordeal, began treating Claire with an easy familiarity that suggested he had, quietly and without fanfare, come to consider her a permanent fixture in Nathan's life. It was during the warehouse building's grand opening celebration, nearly 6 months after the night of the gala, that Claire finally understood just how completely her life had changed. The building, now officially named the Riverside Community Hall, stood transformed, its once empty atrium filled with local art, its reading nooks occupied by children curled up with books, its open community space alive with conversation and music from a small local band performing near the entrance. Claire stood near the tall arched windows, watching the celebration unfold around her, pride swelling warmly in her chest as she took in everything she had helped create. Nathan approached quietly, slipping his hand into hers, both of them watching the scene together in comfortable silence. "You did this," he said softly, nodding toward the crowded, joyful space around them. "This entire building exists because of your vision." "We did this," Claire corrected gently. "Together." Nathan smiled, turning to face her fully, something serious and tender settling into his expression. "Claire," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know I've thought about this for a long time." Claire felt her heart quicken slightly, sensing the weight behind his words. "What is it?" "I spent years building walls around myself," Nathan said carefully, "convincing myself that trust was a luxury I could not afford, that anyone who got close would inevitably want something from me beyond what I could genuinely give. And then you grabbed my arm at a gala, entirely by accident, entirely without any idea who I was, and somehow in the middle of that chaos, you saw me more clearly than almost anyone else ever has." Claire's eyes began to sting with unexpected tears, and she squeezed his hand gently, urging him to continue. "I don't want to build walls anymore," Nathan said quietly. "Not with you. I want a life built on honesty, Claire, the kind of honesty I should have given you from the very beginning. And I want to build that life with you, for as long as you'll have me." Claire felt the warmth of the celebration around them fade into soft, distant background noise as she studied the sincerity in Nathan's expression, the quiet vulnerability of a man who had spent years guarding himself against the world, finally choosing, deliberately and completely, to open himself up to her instead. "I'll have you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Walls and all, though I hope we've moved past most of those by now." Nathan laughed softly, pulling her into a gentle embrace as the celebration continued around them, unaware of the quiet, significant moment unfolding near the tall, arched windows. Claire rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and allowed herself, fully and without hesitation, to believe in the life they were slowly, carefully building together. She thought back briefly to the frightened woman who had grabbed a stranger's arm at a crowded gala nearly 6 months earlier, desperate for nothing more than a way to escape a painful past. She could never have imagined, standing there in that moment of pure panic, just how far that single, impulsive decision would eventually carry her. Life settled into something close to peaceful over the following weeks. Claire moved slowly toward finishing her work with Sterling and Rowe, splitting her time between new projects and quiet evenings spent with Nathan, the two of them growing steadily more comfortable in the rhythm of a life built together. The public attention surrounding their relationship had gradually cooled, replaced by newer headlines and fresher gossip, leaving Claire finally able to walk through the city without the constant, nagging worry of hidden cameras or curious strangers. It was during this calm stretch that Claire first met Victor Graham, a senior member of Cole Global's board of directors. At a small dinner Nathan had arranged to introduce her more formally to his closest business associates. Victor was a tall, silver-haired man with a polished, easy charm that Claire found immediately unsettling, though she could not initially place why. "Miss Bennett," Victor said smoothly, shaking her hand with a firm, deliberate grip. "I've heard quite a lot about you. It seems you've made quite an impression on our Nathan." "It's nice to meet you," Claire replied politely, though something in Victor's tone, a faint undercurrent of calculation beneath the pleasant surface, left her feeling cautious. Throughout the dinner, Victor remained charming and attentive on the surface, engaging Claire in polite conversation about her work, her background, her thoughts on the company's various philanthropic initiatives. Yet Claire noticed, more than once, the way his eyes lingered a moment too long, the way certain questions seemed designed less out of genuine curiosity and more out of careful, quiet assessment. Later that evening, as she and Nathan walked to the car together, she mentioned her unease. "Victor's always been difficult to read," Nathan admitted, opening the car door for her. He's been on the board since the earliest days of the company, back when we were still small enough that every decision felt personal. He's brilliant, genuinely, but he's also fiercely protective of his own position within the company. I've never fully trusted him, if I'm honest. Why keep him on the board, then? Because he's also very good at his job, Nathan said with a small, tired sigh. And removing him would create more complications than it would solve, at least for now. Claire filed the conversation away, though she found herself thinking about Victor Graham more often than she expected over the following days, an uneasy instinct she could not quite shake. Her instincts proved correct sooner than she anticipated. Nearly 2 weeks later, Claire received an unexpected message from an unfamiliar number, requesting a private meeting at a quiet cafe not far from her apartment. The message offered no explanation beyond a single unsettling line. This concerns Nathan, and it's in both your interests to discuss it privately. Against her better judgment, curiosity and concern outweighing caution, Claire agreed to the meeting. She arrived to find Victor Graham already seated at a corner table, a folder placed neatly in front of him, his expression calm and unreadable. "Miss Bennet," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "thank you for coming." "What is this about Victor?" He slid the folder across the table without preamble. Claire opened it cautiously, her stomach tightening as she scanned the contents. A series of financial documents, meeting notes and internal communications, all carefully arranged to suggest, falsely she was certain, that Nathan had been quietly diverting company resources toward personal projects, the Riverside Community Hall chief among them, without proper board approval. "These are fabricated," Claire said flatly, closing the folder. "Every project Nathan's approved has gone through the proper channels. I've been there for most of it." "Perhaps," Victor said smoothly, folding his hands together on the table. "Or perhaps the board simply needs a compelling enough reason to begin asking harder questions about his judgment lately, questions that conveniently trace back to the moment you entered his life." Claire's blood ran cold as understanding settled over her. "You're threatening to use fake documents to push him out of his own company." "I'm suggesting," Victor said carefully, "that Nathan's recent decisions influenced heavily by his personal relationships, have created legitimate concerns among certain board members about his focus and judgment. Concerns that could very easily be resolved, quietly and without any unpleasant public scrutiny, if you were simply to step back from his life, permanently." "You want me to break up with him to protect your position on the board," Claire said slowly, disbelief and anger tightening her voice. "That's what this is really about." Victor's expression did not waver. "I want what's best for the company Nathan and I built together," he said. "And frankly, Miss Bennet, a distracted founder, however brilliant, is a liability the board cannot continue to overlook. You could save everyone a great deal of difficulty by simply removing yourself from the equation quietly." Claire stood abruptly, her hands trembling with barely restrained fury. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "And when Nathan hears about this conversation, and he will hear about it, I don't think the board is going to be nearly as understanding of your position as you seem to believe." Victor's calm expression flickered, just slightly, a brief crack in his composed exterior. "Think carefully before you make threats you cannot follow through on," he said quietly. "I have resources you cannot begin to imagine, Miss Bennet. Fabricated evidence is remarkably easy to make convincing, especially when it aligns so neatly with a narrative the public has already shown itself eager to believe." Claire left the cafe shaken but resolute, her mind racing as she walked briskly back toward her apartment, Victor's thinly veiled threat echoing uncomfortably in her thoughts. She considered, briefly, keeping the encounter to herself, protecting Nathan from yet another complication in a life already burdened by more scrutiny than any person deserved. But she quickly dismissed the thought, remembering clearly the promise they had made to each other months earlier, on the night he had finally told her the truth about his identity. "No secrets." She called Nathan the moment she reached her apartment, relaying the entire conversation carefully, watching through the phone's video call as his expression shifted from concern to controlled, simmering anger. "He actually said that to you directly?" Nathan asked, his voice tight. "Word for word," Claire confirmed. "He showed me fabricated documents, Nathan. He's planning to use them against you if I don't disappear quietly." Nathan was silent for a long moment, jaw tight, clearly working through the implications carefully. "This isn't the first time Victor's tried something like this," he said finally. "Years ago, before you, he attempted something similar with a business partnership I was pursuing, manufacturing concerns to sway the board against a deal he personally opposed. I should have removed him from his position back then. I let my own hesitation protect him far longer than I should have." "What are you going to do?" "Exactly what I should have done years ago," Nathan said, a hard, determined edge entering his voice. "Claire, I need you to trust me on this. Give me a few days to handle it properly, through the right channels, with real evidence rather than accusations alone." "Nathan, he's dangerous. He clearly doesn't care about playing fair." "I know," Nathan said quietly, "which is exactly why I intend to make certain there's no ambiguity left when this is finished. Please, Claire, trust me." Claire agreed, though the following days passed slowly, anxiety gnawing steadily at the edges of her usual calm. She threw herself into work at Sterling and Rowe, trying to distract herself from the uncertainty hanging over Nathan's quiet, careful investigation, though she found her concentration slipping more often than not, her mind circling back again and again to Victor's cold, calculated threat. On the fourth day, Nathan called her late in the evening, his voice carrying a note of controlled satisfaction that immediately eased some of the tension coiled in Claire's chest. "It's done," he said. "Or nearly done, at least. Turns out Victor's little scheme left far more of a trail than he anticipated. My legal team found clear evidence linking the fabricated documents directly back to him, communications with a former employee he paid to falsify records, timestamps that don't align with any legitimate board activity. It's more than enough to bring before the full board." "What happens now?" "There's an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning," Nathan said. "I intend to present the evidence personally. Given the severity of what he's attempted, I expect his removal from the board will be immediate and unanimous." Relief washed through Claire, though a small, lingering unease remained. "Will he try anything else? Before the meeting, I mean." "I've already taken precautions," Nathan said gently. "You don't need to worry, Claire. This ends tomorrow, one way or another." The following morning brought a tense, anxious wait for Claire, who spent much of the day distracted, checking her phone repeatedly for updates despite knowing Nathan would be occupied throughout the emergency meeting. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon when he finally called, his voice carrying a clear, exhausted relief that told her everything before he even spoke the words aloud. "It's finished," he said. The board voted unanimously to remove Victor from his position, effective immediately. He tried to argue his case, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. He didn't have much of a defense left by the time everything was laid out clearly. Claire closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her so completely her knees nearly buckled beneath her. "Thank goodness," she breathed. "Nathan, I'm so glad this is finally over." "Me too," Nathan said quietly. "Claire, I'm sorry you had to go through that at all. I should have dealt with Victor's ambitions years ago, long before he ever had the chance to target you directly." "You handled it," Claire said gently. "That's what matters. And for what it's worth, I never doubted for a second that you would." That evening, Nathan arrived at her apartment unannounced, carrying a simple bouquet of flowers and an expression Claire had not seen from him before, something quietly nervous beneath his usual calm composure. He seemed distracted throughout dinner, glancing at her more often than usual, his fingers occasionally drumming lightly against the table in a way entirely unlike his typically measured demeanor. "Is everything all right?" Claire finally asked, setting down her fork. "You've seemed distracted all evening." Nathan set his own fork down slowly, reaching instead for her hand across the table, his expression turning suddenly, unmistakably serious. "Claire," he said quietly, These past several months, with everything we've faced together, the gala, the fabricated stories, Victor's scheme, all of it, I keep coming back to the same realization over and over. Claire's heart began to race, sensing the significance building steadily in his words. What realization? That none of it has changed how certain I am about wanting you in my life, Nathan said, his voice steady despite the visible nervousness beneath it. If anything, every difficulty we've faced has only made that certainty stronger. I don't want to wait any longer to make that clear, in the most permanent way I know how. Claire felt her breath catch as Nathan rose slowly from his chair, moving around the table to kneel gently beside her, reaching into his jacket pocket to withdraw a small, unassuming box. "Claire Bennett," he said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, "will you marry me?" Tears filled Claire's eyes almost instantly, her hands trembling as she looked between the ring and the quiet, hopeful sincerity written across Nathan's face. The same calm, steady kindness she had first glimpsed in a crowded ballroom nearly 7 months earlier, when a frightened woman had grabbed the arm of a stranger, and without either of them realizing it at the time, set into motion the most unexpected, transformative chapter of both their lives. "Yes," Claire whispered, laughing softly through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." News of the engagement spread quickly, though this time, Claire found herself far better prepared for the wave of public attention that followed. Nathan's legal and communications teams worked carefully to control the narrative from the very beginning, releasing a brief, honest statement about their relationship that left little room for the kind of wild speculation that had plagued them months earlier. Most of the coverage that followed was warm, even celebratory, several outlets running features about the community hall project Claire had led, framing her not as a mysterious outsider chasing fortune, but as a talented designer whose work had genuinely impressed one of the country's most private businessmen. Margaret Hale was, unsurprisingly, the first to call once the news became official, her sharp voice carrying an unmistakable warmth Claire had not expected during their very first meeting months earlier. "I want you to know," Margaret said, "that I don't extend approval easily, Claire. I've watched too many people try to take advantage of Nathan's generosity over the years, but you've more than proven yourself. I'm genuinely happy for you both." Lily, predictably, screamed loudly enough over the phone that Claire had to hold the receiver several inches from her ear, immediately launching into an excited, rapid-fire list of wedding planning questions that left Claire laughing for the first time in weeks, without any trace of the anxiety that had shadowed recent months. Even Oliver Grant, ever composed and professional, allowed himself a rare, genuine smile when Claire next visited the offices of Cole Global, offering his congratulations with an unusually warm handshake. "It's good to see him this happy," Oliver admitted quietly. "It's been a long time coming." The wedding itself took place nearly 8 months later, on a clear, mild afternoon at the very location where their story had truly begun to flourish. The Riverside Community Hall, its atrium transformed with soft white flowers and strings of delicate lights woven carefully among the tall arched windows Claire had once sketched on rolls of blueprint paper spread across plywood tables. It was, both Claire and Nathan agreed, exactly the right choice. Rather than a grand, exclusive affair held in some private estate far removed from ordinary life, they chose instead to celebrate surrounded by the very community the building had been designed to serve, inviting not only close friends and family, but also several of the local artists and residents who had become regular fixtures within the space over the preceding months. Claire stood near the tall arched windows before the ceremony began, taking a quiet moment to herself amid the gentle bustle of final preparations, Lily fussing nearby with the final adjustments to her dress. She thought back, as she often did during quiet moments like this, to the frightened woman who had once stood in a crowded ballroom, desperately searching for any means of escape, never imagining that a single, impulsive decision would eventually lead her here, to this exact building, surrounded by people who had come to matter so deeply to her life. "Ready?" Lily asked softly, stepping back to admire her handiwork with a warm, teary-eyed smile. I think I've been ready for a while now, Claire said, smiling back at her friend. It just took me some time to fully believe it. The ceremony itself was simple, warm, and deeply personal, Nathan's voice steady and sure as he spoke his vows, promising honesty, patience, and an unwavering commitment to building a life together grounded in the same quiet trust that had first drawn them to each other months earlier. Claire, in turn, spoke of resilience, of second chances, and of the quiet, unexpected courage it had taken to trust again after everything she had once believed love could never truly offer her. As the ceremony concluded and the small crowd gathered around them broke into warm applause, Claire caught sight of Margaret standing near the back, dabbing carefully at her eyes, and Oliver beside her, offering a rare, unrestrained smile. Nearby, several of the local artists who regularly used the gallery space stood watching with genuine warmth, having come to know both Claire and Nathan not as distant, wealthy strangers, but as people who had poured genuine care into the community they now called home. The celebration that followed carried long into the evening, music and laughter filling the same atrium where Claire had once nervously unrolled blueprints, explaining her vision to a quiet man in a plain gray suit who had, at the time, seemed like nothing more than an unusually thoughtful stranger with a passing interest in unfinished buildings. Later that night, as the celebration finally began winding down, Claire and Nathan stepped quietly onto the building's newly constructed terrace, overlooking the softly lit waterfront beyond. The city stretched out before them, distant and glittering, much as it had the very first night they met, when Claire had stood on a similar terrace at the Hearthstone Gala, shaken and grateful, unaware of just how significant that stranger's kindness would eventually become. "Do you ever think about that night?" Claire asked quietly, resting her head against Nathan's shoulder as they looked out over the water. "The gala, I mean, how different everything could have turned out." Nathan considered the question seriously, wrapping an arm gently around her. "Often," he admitted. "I think about how easily I could have stayed home that evening. I nearly did, if I'm being honest. Galas were never really my kind of event." "What changed your mind?" "Oliver, actually," Nathan said with a small, amused laugh. "He insisted it would be good for the company's public image. I nearly argued my way out of going entirely." Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. "So we really do owe this whole thing to Oliver's insistence and my terrible instinct to grab the nearest stranger in a crisis." "A very fortunate instinct," Nathan corrected gently, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. "The best decision either of us ever made, even if neither of us realized it at the time." They stood together in comfortable silence for a long while, the sounds of the celebration fading softly behind them, the city lights reflecting gently across the calm waters below. Claire thought about everything they had endured together over the past year, the public scrutiny, Daniel's cruel interference, Victor's calculated betrayal, and how, despite every obstacle placed carefully in their path, the quiet, steady trust they had built together had only grown stronger with each passing challenge. She thought, too, about the woman she had been before that night, anxious, guarded, still healing from wounds she had once believed might never fully close. She was not entirely that same woman anymore, though pieces of that caution remained, woven carefully into the stronger, steadier person she had slowly become. Nathan had never asked her to abandon that caution entirely, had never demanded she simply trust blindly without reason. Instead, he had spent every day since that chaotic night at the gala patiently, consistently earning that trust, proving through quiet, steady actions rather than empty promises that he was exactly who he claimed to be. "I love you," Claire said softly, turning to look up at him, the soft glow of the terrace lights illuminating the warmth in his expression. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that night. For not asking questions, for not hesitating, for just helping a complete stranger without expecting anything in return." "You don't need to thank me," Nathan said gently, cupping her face softly in his hands. "You gave me something far more valuable than gratitude, Claire. You gave me the chance to be known, fully and honestly, by someone who chose to stay even after learning everything difficult and complicated that comes with loving me. That's a gift I don't think I can ever properly repay." Claire smiled, leaning into his touch, the quiet certainty of their shared future settling comfortably around them both. "Then I suppose we're even," she said softly. Two strangers who happened to save each other, without ever meaning to. Nathan leaned down slowly, capturing her lips in a soft, lingering kiss, and Claire felt, in that quiet, perfect moment, every lingering trace of fear and uncertainty she had carried since that chaotic night finally settle into something steady, something whole. Behind them, the celebration continued softly, laughter and music drifting gently across the water, the community hall glowing warmly against the darkening evening sky. A building born from careful vision and quiet trust, standing now as a permanent, tangible symbol of everything Claire and Nathan had built together, both within its walls and within the steady, unshakable foundation of their own hard-won, deeply earned love. They stayed on that terrace long after the last guests departed, simply standing together beneath the stars, grateful, finally, for a single impulsive decision made in the middle of a crowded, frightening night. A decision that had, against every possible odd, led them exactly where they were always meant to be. 3 years passed quickly, filled with the steady, ordinary rhythms of a life neither Claire nor Nathan had ever quite imagined for themselves, a life that managed to feel both remarkable and comfortably grounded at once. Claire left Sterling and Rowe not long after the wedding, choosing instead to launch her own small design studio, one dedicated entirely to community-focused projects similar to the Riverside Community Hall. Nathan funded the studio's early years quietly, though he insisted, firmly and repeatedly, that Claire alone would make every creative and business decision, refusing to let his involvement overshadow the work she was building for herself. The studio grew steadily, earning a reputation within the city for thoughtful, community-centered design, transforming forgotten warehouses and neglected public spaces into libraries, art centers, and gathering halls across several neighborhoods that had long been overlooked by larger development firms. Claire hired a small, dedicated team, including, much to her delight, Priya Malhotra, who left Sterling and Rowe within the year to join Claire's growing studio full-time. Nathan, for his part, gradually began shifting more of Cole Global's philanthropic focus toward similar community-driven initiatives. Inspired, he often admitted publicly, by watching Claire's work firsthand. The company's public image softened considerably over those years, shifting away from the distant, mysterious reputation it had once held, toward something warmer, more approachable, more connected to the everyday lives of the communities it touched. Victor Graham's name occasionally surfaced in business news over those years, though his influence had diminished considerably since his removal from the board, and Claire found she rarely thought of him at all anymore, his once threatening presence reduced to little more than a distant, unpleasant memory. Daniel, too, had faded entirely from her life, and though she occasionally heard second-hand updates through mutual acquaintances, she found she felt nothing beyond a quiet, distant indifference toward the man who had once held such destructive power over her sense of safety. It was on a quiet Tuesday morning, nearly 3.5 years after their wedding, that Claire sat across from Nathan at their kitchen table, nervously turning a small envelope over in her hands. "You're being unusually quiet," Nathan observed, glancing up from his coffee with a curious, gentle smile. "Everything all right?" Claire hesitated only a moment longer before sliding the envelope across the table toward him. Nathan set down his coffee, opening it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents within, a small printed image from an early medical appointment. His expression shifted slowly from confusion to dawning realization, his eyes widening as understanding settled fully across his face. "Claire," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, are you certain?" "Very certain," Claire said, unable to fully suppress the wide, nervous smile spreading across her own face. "We're going to have a baby, Nathan." Nathan rose immediately from his chair, moving around the table to pull her carefully into his arms, laughter and disbelief mixing together in his voice as he held her close. Claire, this is incredible news. I don't even know what to say." "You could start by not squeezing quite so tightly," Claire teased gently, laughing against his shoulder. Nathan pulled back immediately, though his hands remained gently on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers with a warmth and tenderness that still, even after years together, managed to leave her breathless. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you, and I cannot wait to build this next chapter together, whatever it brings." Their daughter, whom they eventually named Grace, arrived nearly 8 months later, on a mild spring evening, filling their lives with a new, entirely different kind of joy neither of them had fully anticipated. Margaret Hale, upon meeting the newest addition to the family for the first time, declared with characteristic bluntness that the child had clearly inherited her mother's stubborn determination and her father's quiet, careful thoughtfulness, a combination she predicted, with a rare, genuine smile, would prove formidable in the years ahead. Lily, naturally, insisted on being named godmother, a role she embraced with the same enthusiastic energy she brought to everything else in her life, spoiling Grace at every opportunity with an endless stream of gifts and attention that left Claire both amused and gently exasperated in equal measure. As Grace grew older, Claire often found herself returning to the Riverside Community Hall with her daughter in tow, walking slowly through the same atrium where her own story with Nathan had first quietly begun to unfold, pointing out small details to Grace, the reading nooks she had designed, the gallery walls that still proudly displayed rotating collections from local artists, the tall arched windows that had watched over so many significant moments in her own life. "This is where Mommy and Daddy first really got to know each other," she told Grace one afternoon, as they sat together in one of the reading nooks, sunlight streaming softly through the windows above them. "Before any of the complicated things happened, before any of the difficult parts. Just two people, talking about a building neither of us knew would end up meaning so much." Grace, still too young to fully grasp the significance of her mother's words, simply smiled and continued flipping through the picture book resting in her lap, content in the quiet warmth of the moment, unaware of just how much courage, patience, and hard-won trust had gone into building the peaceful, steady life she now called her own. Nathan joined them later that afternoon, settling beside Claire in the reading nook, watching quietly as Grace happily narrated her picture book with the confident, nonsensical authority only a small child could manage. He reached over, taking Claire's hand gently in his own, the same quiet, steady gesture that had become so familiar over the years, though it never once lost its warmth. "Happy?" he asked softly, watching their daughter with quiet, contented pride. "More than I ever thought possible," Claire answered honestly, resting her head against his shoulder. "It's strange, isn't it, how something as small and impulsive as grabbing a stranger's arm at a party could eventually lead to all of this." "I don't think it was as small as it felt at the time," Nathan said thoughtfully. "I think you recognized something in that moment, some quiet trust neither of us fully understood yet. It just took the rest of our lives to prove you were right to trust it." Claire smiled, watching Grace happily turn another page of her picture book, the soft afternoon light filling the space around them with a warm, golden glow. She thought, as she often did during quiet moments like this one, about the frightened woman she had once been, desperately searching a crowded ballroom for any means of escape, and felt nothing but quiet, grateful wonder at just how far that single, desperate decision had ultimately carried her. Outside the tall arched windows, the city continued its steady rhythm, unaware and unconcerned with the quiet, remarkable story that had unfolded within these walls, a story that had begun, entirely by accident, with nothing more than a moment of fear, a stranger's outstretched kindness, and the quiet, unexpected courage it takes to trust again after everything once felt irreparably broken. It was, Claire often reflected, never really about the wealth, the headlines, or the staggering, almost unimaginable fortune that had once seemed so central to their story when it first captured public attention. It had always, from that very first chaotic night, been about something far simpler and far more valuable, two people willing to see each other honestly, patiently, and completely, regardless of everything the wider world tried to place between them. And as the golden afternoon light stretched slowly across the atrium floor, illuminating the quiet, steady family they had built together, Claire understood, more clearly than ever, that this simple, hard-won truth had been worth every difficult step it had taken to finally arrive here.